Now, for more on the ties between Tokyo and Moscow, I'm joined by Ralph Winnie. He's the Global Business Development Director for the Eurasian Business Coalition's China program. Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you, Rachelle. Glad to be with you.
Now, let's start with a look at the size and scope of overall ties between Russia and Japan. How important is this relationship between these respective economies?
I think it's extremely important to have this relationship. I mean, they're talking about energy, oil and gas, automotive, building high-tech medical centers. I mean, it's extremely important to improve the health and quality of life of their respective peoples.
So clearly a lot of sectors in common. Is there anyone that's really a driving force for them?
Certainly oil and gas, and this is one of the reasons why the islands are so crucial. The idea, I think, is for Russia to look at other markets and to really work with the Japanese so that they don't have to rely on the United States and Europe, given the issue with the sanctions that have been in place for many, many years.
And speaking of those economic sanctions, Japan does still support those, but it was still the first G7 country to invite Putin for an official visit. So it is still a very tough balance with these sanctions being imposed. How much of a strain does that put on economic ties?
Well, Russia, there are options to get around the sanctions. I mean, certainly they signed that oil and gas deal with China a couple of years ago, but Russia was really on the losing end of that. According to Putin, he says our Chinese friends drive a hard bargain. So you know that Russia did not get the benefit of that deal. So they have to look at countries like Japan who are willing to work with them, but certainly Russia will pay a heavy price as long as these sanctions are in effect.
Now, we did mention these islands that are in dispute, and Prime Minister Abe said that they did discuss this joint economic development. But how much of that is going to be a hindrance when it comes to economic cooperation going forward?
Well, if you have strong economic ties, if you can set up projects that are really going to benefit the people of the respective countries, and you're going to have a lot of money made on both sides, that will trump a lot of these geopolitical issues. But certainly, you can't put those geopolitical issues aside. So it's kind of that delicate balance. But certainly, I think the power of money triumphs in the end.
And you mentioned some of the other markets that Russia is looking at, and we know that Russia and China have growing economic ties. How do you think China will view this growing Russia-Japanese relationship?
Well, certainly China is concerned. I mean, they want to establish a Asia-Pacific free trade agreement, and they'd be very concerned about a closer relationship between Japan and Russia.
What would the biggest concerns be?
Well, they view Japan as a major competitor. Japan has the Olympics in 2020. China wants to be the dominant power in the Asia-Pacific region, and they don't want Russia to come in and sort of help Japan achieve the goal of being that dominant power.
Now, you mentioned some of the other partners as well. Despite these sanctions from the US and from the European Union, Russia is still forging some of these ties with other countries. How is that strategy going?
Well, they've set up the Eurasian Economic Union. So Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Belarus are all part of a free trade global union. And certainly that's very helpful, but I think the Russians need to bring in more parties. And certainly bringing in countries like Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan would be helpful. I mean, Armenia is included, but if you could get Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and a country like Japan or a country like New Zealand, it would be very good.
And since we have seen that commodities crunch, you know, oil is not necessarily the be-all, end-all. Are there any other sectors then that Russia and Japan are looking into to really kind of steer away from commodities, perhaps?
Maybe the automotive, maybe certainly telecommunications. These are other areas that I think will be beneficial for both countries if they can get some projects off the ground. But certainly, it's going to take a little while. I think nothing is going to happen overnight, and the Russians, I think, are thinking long term. If they can develop a relationship with the Trump administration, it might go a long way in helping their relations improve with Japan, even China.
We'll certainly see how that plays out next year. Thank you very much, Ralph Winnie,
Thanks
Global Business Development Director for the Eurasian Business Coalition's China program. Thank you again.
Thank you.